roster building. Do the 49ers have a roster building problem? I think your answer is going to be no, they don't. But why don't you walk me through that?
Yeah, and I don't want to I don't want us to like misconstrue what Ryan's opinion was, because I don't think if we got Ryan on here, he would say that the 49ers have a roster building issue. Like, anybody that knows football knows that the 49ers roster is one of the top 5 rosters in the league, if not top 3 rosters. So you can't have as many all pros that this team has and say that this team doesn't know how to build a roster. I think Ryan's points were specifically about the offensive line. And so, that's where
I think what he's saying, prioritizing, like the 49ers, to him, the 3 spots, and I agree, you usually prioritize the quarterback, protecting the quarterback, getting after the quarterback. And the 49ers on spot number 2 really haven't put a lot of priority into that. And I think there's frustration from him on that. And again, this is not a show where I'm going to talk about other content creators. And if I do bring up a take about them, I'm always going to name them so that they understand that this is not, we're not coming at anybody. We're just bringing it up for conversation's sake. And Sunil disagrees, but it's not coming from a place of malice.
Yeah. And look, I think that when it comes to this narrative that I think there's a difference between, have the 49ers tried? Have they gotten it right? And then what's their philosophy surrounding the position, right? So I think that there's the sentiment that the 49ers haven't tried. And to me, that is a narrative that doesn't make sense. They've had 7 drafts under the Shanahan Lynch regime. They've drafted offensive line in 5 of those drafts. 2 of those picks have been a first rounder in McGlinchey, a second rounder in Aaron Banks. And then in one of those drafts, they also traded for the top left tackle in the league. 3 out of the 5 starters on this team are homegrown, drafted and developed players. So the 49ers are doing what they can to build this offensive line. Now, am I saying this is the best offensive line in the league? No. I think a portion of that has to do with the way that Kyle Shanahan looks at the offensive line. I don't think he necessarily looks at offensive linemen the same way that maybe the fan base would like to look at offensive linemen, maybe some of the players in the league, because he values more their ability to run block than to pass protect, because he feels like he could scheme things to overlook weaknesses and maybe pass protection. And I think that's where people really get at. That's where the crux of maybe the frustration with some of the fan base is. And it's warranted. Like, look, that's a philosophy thing. I don't think that's going to change under Kyle Shanahan, because ultimately he believes in his ability and his quarterback's decision-making to be able to get the ball out to the right person quick enough, and that his offensive linemen can hold up long enough to be able to do that. Now, obviously, when you look back at this Super Bowl, there's been moments where you wish you maybe had a guy who could just, win one-on-one. And then there's discussion. Was that a scheme issue? Did the guys just miss their block? So there's a lot that goes into it that I will admit I don't know all the X's and O's. And ultimately, I would probably challenge most people that debate about the offensive line and how good they are, whether or not they know all of the nuances that are going on about the offensive line. Because I do think that sometimes we think players are worse than what they are, because just like a cornerback, you only remember the negatives. You don't remember the 95% of the times that they held their blocks. You remember the 2-3% that they missed their block or whatever, because that leads to a negative play. But ultimately, when it comes to the offensive line, like I said, I completely agree. Like, one, the 49ers haven't had a first-round pick in a couple of years because they went all in on Trey Lance, right? That severely hinders your ability to get great offensive linemen. You're pretty much kind of reaching past the first and second round for offensive linemen, hoping that maybe somebody falls to your position, or you have to be able to, really evaluate the position at a level that maybe the 49ers aren't as great as, like, so like, I'm not saying that it's a strength of theirs, but I am saying that I think that people that just say the 49ers don't value that position, they don't try at that position. To me, they don't. I think it's more about they value the position in a different way than maybe traditionally valued. And I have seen a lot of effort in them trying to upgrade the offensive line. I just don't think necessarily it may have worked out the way that they have. But to me, I'm on the side. I want them to use a first or second round draft pick on one of these tackles to really upgrade that right tackle position, and obviously, potentially maybe two tackles, so that they have somebody on deck for when Trent Williams ultimately retires. But that's basically what my argument was, is that, like, it's not, I don't think we could just say, oh, the 49ers are able to draft all of these positions well, and then all of a sudden they just don't know what they're doing at offensive line. I think it's more of a philosophy thing that people just maybe don't agree with. And I get it if you don't agree with it, because it's obviously a lot different than just those, drop back, give your quarterback 4 or 5 seconds in the pocket type of offensive lines. That's not, I don't think will ever be built under Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah, I'm glad that you answered because my next question was, okay, does your stance change if they don't draft an offensive lineman with that first pick? But it sounds like that's the route you want to go as well. I think you're kind of right. It's a choice. It's a philosophy choice. I don't necessarily agree with it. I mean, they put a lot of stock in skill position players, which is interesting for a guy who is an offensive coordinator. You would think that wouldn't be the preference. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just not what I would prefer. I'd rather win in the trenches, and they do that defensively, but offensively, that's not necessarily the route that they've taken to put the most priority into the offensive line. Not that they've put none in. I don't think that they've put none in, but what they have put in really hasn't hit the way that they probably had hoped or thought or what have you. So we'll see. I mean, I think that they definitely need to draft an offensive lineman with that first pick that they have in this draft, pick 31, or if they move back a couple spots, move up a couple spots. That's definitely what I would like to see for sure. So I don't
Unless
know, man.
somebody crazy drops. Unless somebody crazy drops,
Yeah.
obviously. But yeah, ultimately, and I think, there's this sentiment that the 49ers, like, they don't prioritize it. And I just think the way they evaluate the position is different than the fan base would like them to evaluate the position. Like, Mike McGlinchey, for a lot of people, he was a terrible right tackle. Well, the league didn't see it that way. The league ended up paying him as the number one right tackle, and the 49ers let him walk because they didn't want to pay him that much. And ultimately, he didn't pan out for the Broncos. But they felt like McGlinchey wasn't. They felt like McKivitz was feasible. Like, there wasn't going to be that much a drop off, and he was cheaper. Now, obviously, McGlinchey had an up and down season. His downs were, well publicized, and the fan base loves, picking on the right tackle, and rightfully so. He had some terrible games and some terrible moments, but once again, I think they value more his ability for run blocking than pass protection, and that's just something where if you're a 49er fan, you're going to constantly, I think, be frustrated in that, because ultimately I think that when this regime evaluates the offensive line, they're looking for mobility and their ability to block, to run, even if it means that they're not as good at pass protection. And ultimately, that's just something that you just have to understand. That's what it's always going to be.